Dean Rusk disagrees with you, and he was the Secretary of State at the time, but that's fine.
The communist nations have exploited the turmoil of a time of transition in an effort to extend communist control into other areas of the world.
Thoughts on Dean Rusk and America's involvement in Vietnam? I know next to nothing about that.
Exactly.
Today marks the 75th anniversary of D-Day. Churchill, Hitler, and the Unnecessary War. How Britain Lost Its Empire and the West Lost the World, by Patrick J. Buchanan. Review. It's quite apparent that this book has received quite a number of passionate reviews and comments that has largely to do with Pat Buchanan's high profile as a contemporary political commentator. It is also obvious that both the book and the reviews are based solely on whether or not the reviewers and commentators share Pat's current political opinions. Such reactions would be perfectly in order if this were another of Pat's works commentating on the current political scene. It is not. It instead purports to be history and should be evaluated as such. Pat tries to be a historian here. We should evaluate his work as such. It doesn't take long for Pat to be unmasked. Look, for example, at page 151. Pat says that when Anthony Eden was removed as Foreign Secretary by Neville Chamberlain, Rome rejoiced. As anyone who has read even a little history of the appeasement era knows, Eden was most certainly not removed by Chamberlain. Eden resigned along with his top aides, including Lord Robert Cranborne, in protest against Chamberlain's policies. This is one of the most well-known events of the 1930s run up to the war. King George VI was so concerned that he proposed that he call Eden in for a talk to try to change his mind to keep His Majesty's government united in perilous times. If Pat can't get one of the most high-profile events of the era right, why on earth should we pay any attention to the rest of the work? Anyone who thinks Pat has a clue about Churchill or the appeasement era should go to the C-SPAN archives, look under Legacy of Winston Churchill, and see him embarrassed in a debate in London.
May I respond to the gentleman that raised a question about the Swansea Conference, which is, some historians or many credit as the beginning of the Holocaust. That occurred on January 31, February 1 of 1942, 2.5 years into the war. No war, no Swansea Conference, no Holocaust. Who started the war? Hitler. Hitler started the war on September 1, 1939. But on September 3rd, Britain and France declared war on Germany. Why? To honor a war guarantee to Poland that they could not honor, they had no plans to honor, and they did not. In this sense, the French army told the Poles, on the 15th day, the whole French army will be thrown against Germany. The British told the Poles, if they bomb Warsaw, we bomb Berlin. They did not. And so the Poles suffered this horrendous fate because they took faith in a war guarantee, which I submit the French and British, heroic as they were, could not conceivably honor. Eastern and Central Europe was going to be decided by the two great monsters, Hitler and Stalin. And the British and French should have done what the Americans, British and French did when Stalin dishonored the Yalta agreements and began rolling over these countries, and Brezhnev or Khrushchev rolled into Hungary. You didn't break relations, you did go to war, you said, don't cross our red line. If Britain had done that, I don't care who the Prime Minister was, for the life of me, I believe that Hitler wanted no war in the West. He had a lot of things he might want to do in the East, but there's no way you can prevent that. And if you can't prevent it, for God's sakes, why do you declare war for it?
Thank you. There's an important issue within that answer, which was no war, no Holocaust. Andrew.
It is an absolutely monstrous thing to say. The Holocaust started far earlier than the Wannsee Conference. The SS were killing Jews in Poland as soon as the invasion of Poland took place. The Einsatzgruppen that followed the Wehrmacht into Russia killed up to 1 million Jews before the Wannsee Conference, and all the Wannsee Conference did was to organize the disgusting industrialization of the massacre of the Jews. That predated the Wannsee Conference to the extent of literally over 1 million people.
What's Pat trying to do with this book? I would submit that he is trying to do two things. First, Pat, of course, is not only a conservative, but he is very much an isolationist. he is fed up with interventionist neocons, and the latter always holding up Churchill and the appeasement era as a lesson supporting foreign interventionism. So, discredit Churchill as the poster boy and discredit the neocons. Let's also be honest here, anything about Churchill sells, so further your 21st century political views, stir the pot and sell books. Not an unintelligent plan at all, Pat's no dummy. Besides its lack of objectivity and straightforward incompetence in research, this book poses as history. It is not. It is a polemic. Think of it as an equivalent of reading the lawyer's brief on one side of a court case instead of reading the judge's opinion afterwards. This work presents itself as a scholarly examination of Churchill and the era. It is far from that, as one could imagine. Part of the difficulty in addressing the myriad or the myriad of omissions and misrepresentations in Pat's book is the complexity of events it purports to cover and the resulting length required for complete responses. Let's just take a few easily addressed and obvious problems as example. As we mentioned before, incompetence, not knowing that Edmund resigned in protest as Chamberlain's foreign secretary instead of being removed by Chamberlain. Lack of objectivity. 1. Omitting Churchill's many speeches and writings before World War I, warning that would be more awful than most in public life imagined, and that it should be avoided and not spoken of so cavalierly. Instead, Pat repeats a Churchill quote from after the war had started, in which he expressed enthusiasm for the undertaking, trying to make it appear as though Churchill was eager for the war. 2. Use of pejorative words and phraseology designed to denigrate Churchill, obviously hoping readers won't know the difference. A. At page 30, quote, Churchill would claim to have slain half a dozen enemy at Omdurman. The use of claim implies that this was some sort of groundless boast by Churchill about whether there is some question as to its veracity. In fact, Churchill was in the midst of fighting for his life, and a cavalry charge at the time was observed by a number of his fellow lancers. The accounts of the others have always supported Churchill's account, and have even credited him with courageous exploits which he did not publish in his own account. B. At page 59, quote, Churchill had been captured riding in an armored train in the early days of the Boer War. This sounds as though Churchill had been just a passenger on a train when captured. In fact, though present only as a war correspondent, Churchill jumped into the action when the train was ambushed and trapped under artillery fire, and at great personal risk under heavy fire, led an heroic effort to move derailed cars off the tracks and get the train, the wounded, and as many additional soldiers as possible out of the trap and to safety. He then jumped off the train and returned to help the others, for whom there was no room on the train, and was captured by the Boers along with the others. That obviously doesn't tell all that, because it wouldn't present Churchill in a deservedly heroic light. Instead of his conscious spin, which represents Churchill as the train passenger. An intellectually honest manner in which Pat could have approached this subject would have been for him to have made the case that the lesson of the appeasement era had been misapplied in the past, say the Suez Crisis, and debunk the arguments of those who continually bring it up today. The approach he has taken is quite deceitful, and he has really embarrassed himself with those who know much of anything of the appeasement era and Churchill. Those who know little of the history of Europe in the first half of the 20th century may find some value in this book, as they are bound to learn some things in the timeline of the various treaties, etc. There are, however, far better works out there for that. See, for example, David Farber's Munich 1938. As for this book, we can refer to Richard Overy's statement in regards to Mr. Buchanan's work on the subject. What we are hearing is a kind of counter-history, which seems to me doesn't serve our cause very well at all. Based on a review by Don Greater, September 22nd, 2009.
Why the woke right hates Churchill. The accepted historical narrative of the past 80 years, that it was morally right for the US and the UK to fight and destroy the Third Reich, is now under assault. Long demonized by the left, Churchill has become a villain of the woke right. In November 1940, Winston Churchill delivered a eulogy in Westminster Abbey at the funeral of Neville Chamberlain, his predecessor as Prime Minister. He spoke poetically about how historical judgments are reached. History, he said, with its flickering lamp, stumbles along the trails of the past, trying to reconstruct its themes, to revive its echoes, and kindle with pale gleams the passion of former days. 60 years after his death, Churchill's own reputation is now at the forefront of the culture wars, something that he himself would have relished, having put himself on the front line of 5 real wars on 4 continents before the age of 42. Churchill has long been hated by the left, blamed for opposing socialism and communism, breaking Britain's general strike of 1926, supporting the British Empire, and so on. Yet lately, a new and particularly virulent strain of Churchill hatred has broken out on the woke right, on both sides of the Atlantic, where he is blamed for quite a different set of supposed crimes. Tucker Carlson has praised Darrell Cooper, a historian who blames Churchill for escalating World War II. The American podcaster Darrell Cooper, who has never written a book, let alone one about World War II, but whom Tucker Carlson calls America's most honest historian, has claimed that it was Churchill's fault that the war escalated from the limited one that Adolf Hitler apparently wanted when he invaded Poland in September 1939. According to Cooper, Churchill was the chief villain of World War II rather than any of the more obvious suspects. There are a number of problems with this theory, not at least chronological. Churchill did not even enter the British government until 2 days after the Nazis' invasion of Poland. Even then, he was not in control of British decision-making, as he did not become Prime Minister until after Hitler had unleashed his blitzkrieg on Western Europe in May 1940. Nonetheless, tens of millions of people have downloaded Cooper's ahistoric tripe, and the British neo-Nazi historian David Uring tweeted, "Glad we're on the mainstream narrative, but it would be nice to get a credit," which he got over 250,000 views and over 5,000 likes. Joe Rogan, the world's most popular podcaster, has simply opened the door to extreme revisionism, saying that Darrell Cooper has some of the most nuanced, balanced, and charitable views on all the figures in history, which is true only if he means the Nazis. Cooper's remarks on the Tucker Carlson show led the Holocaust-denying podcaster Jake Shield to conduct a poll on X asking who is the biggest villain of World War II. Among his almost 136,000 robotic respondents, 40.3% gave that distinction to Churchill, with Stalin at 25.9%, narrowly beating Hitler at 25.3%. Shield's post was viewed by some 855,000 people. It led to a spate of online Churchill hatred, with comments such as, "The good guys lost World War II," "Churchill wanted a war," "Churchill was pure evil," and so on endlessly. Meanwhile, in Britain, many representatives of the woke right Populist Reform Party have simply demonized Churchill. Ian Gribben, a general election candidate, posted on the Unheard website that Britain would be in a far better state today had we taken Hitler up on his offer of neutrality. But oh no, Britain's warped mindset values weird notions of international morality rather than looking after its own people. He later wrote, "In Britain specifically, we need to expose the cult of Churchill and recognize that in both policy and military strategy, he was abysmal." Reform's official spokesman then doubled down on these comments when speaking to, ironically enough, the Jewish Chronicle, saying that they were written with an eye to inconvenient perspectives and truths. So why is the woke right targeting Churchill? In the simplest terms, it is because his practical aims and principles as a leader of the West were directly opposed to the new strain of isolationism in American Britain. Today's revisionists project their views about Iraq, Afghanistan, and Iran backward through history and denounce the leading global interventions of yesteryear. They blame Churchill, along with Roosevelt, for escalating the conflict with Hitler and thus associating with any effort to confront today's aggressive tyrants. Joe Rogan, the world's most popular podcaster, has backed a historian who questions Churchill's role in World War II. It is a sign of the lost trust in established institutions on both sides of the Atlantic that the accepted historical narrative of the past 80 years that it was morally right for the US and the UK to fight and destroy the Third Reich is now under assault. This new revisionism is possible only because the greatest generation is dying out, and their sacrifice is becoming a debatable part of history rather than a lived reality. It is an unfortunate necessity to engage with these benign and often hateful revisionists, as their failure to win the endorsement of any of the hundreds of serious historians of World War II suggests their arguments, such as they are, cannot survive contact with reality of the historical record. It is perfectly true that Churchill was instrumental in persuading the British War Cabinet not to make peace with Hitler. The decision was taken after no fewer than 9 discussions over 4 days between May 25th and May 28th, 1940. As they deliberated, a small armada of boats made their way to evacuate the British expeditionary force from the beaches of Dunkirk back to Britain. Quote, "The reason I resent Churchill so much for it," Cooper told Carson, "is that he kept this war going when he had no way of winning. He had no way to go back and fight this war. All he had was bombers. Just rank terrorism." More than that, once Hitler ripped up yet another treaty and invaded Russia in June 1941, Churchill immediately made common cause with Stalin against Nazi Germany. It's worth considering that might have happened had Churchill not urged these fateful choices. If Britain had remained neutral in the West and refrained from bombing Germany, Hitler would have been able to concentrate his entire Luftwaffe against Russia. Instead, he had to hold back 30% of it to guard against Churchill's bombers. Neutrality in the face of Hitler would have meant that the 5,000 aircraft and 7,000 tanks and 51 million pairs of boots and the rest of the aid that Britain and America sent to the USSR would not have materialized, nor would the invasion of Normandy have taken place while the Russians and Germans were fighting in Belarus. Which leads to the obvious. With either Hitler or Stalin controlling all of Europe between Paris and Minsk, the world, including America, would have been in a vastly worse place than the one that Churchill and Roosevelt helped to fashion in 1945. In his peroration in the Westminster Abbey speech, Churchill said, "The only guide to a man is his conscience. The only shield to his memory is the rectitude and sincerity of his actions. It is very imprudent to walk through life without this shield, because we are so often mocked by the failure of our hopes and the upsetting of our calculations. But with this shield, however the fate may play, we always march at the ranks of honor." Despite the best efforts of his revisionist detractors, Churchill marches there still. He stands watching over a world order that is now challenged by, among other things, a woke right. Andrew Roberts is the author of Churchill, Walking with Destiny. He is a member of the House of Lords.